I'm back with another episode of CXO Conversations. If you're new to the series, welcome. My name is Klaudia Tirico, and I'm the editor of Demand Gen Report. I'm really stoked for this episode today because I have one of the coolest CMOs in the game in the hot seat today. His name is Randy Frisch, and he's the CMO at Uberflip. Randy, it's so great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you too. I feel like usually we're doing this backstage at one of the events, but this is the modern backstage, right?
Definitely. I love that. Actually, that's a new term that I might coin later, the modern backstage. I love it. And yeah, I mean, the last time we saw each other was at our event, the B2B Marketing Exchange in Scottsdale in February. And I feel like a lifetime has already gone by.
You guys really snuck that in, huh? Like
we really
under the radar or at the buzzer.
Yeah,
it's
right
wild
at the buzzer.
to think that event happened when it did, because we none of us had concerns at that point.
Yeah.
And I remember actually I had breakfast on the last day with Peter Isaacson, another CMO at a company called Demand Base. And his event was like a few weeks out. And we talked about like, is it weird? No, it's weird. But, it's like our event is still going to happen. And I think it was like 5 days later, he was canceling his.
Yeah. And I was so bummed to hear that event got canceled too. I had major plans for like a San Fran trip. I was going to go to Sonoma afterwards. And that all kind of, no, not fun. But was that the last industry, our B2B MX event, was that the last event you spoke at?
That was the last event I spoke at live. I mean, I've moved to speaking at a lot of events, post COVID, but it's interesting. It's a different form of event sometimes. I mean, I've used some really cool platforms. I think the Hopin platform is really slick if you've seen that one.
Oh, interesting. I haven't.
Pretty new. And then I found that I'm actually being asked to speak sometimes to specific teams at companies. It's almost like the account-based talk, and if you will, because some of those teams, they can't get to events anymore. So just a few weeks back, I spoke to the entire marketing team at Dow Jones, who's a customer of ours at Uberflip. And, it's a different vibe that you got to create in speaking in these types of settings. And, it's interesting to watch how people are adapting.
Yeah, it definitely is really cool. And people are getting super creative. But I loved your presentation back at our event. And I feel like it's actually almost even more relevant today than it was back in February. You talked about how marketers are accelerating the buyer journey with bingeable experiences and shared how to create content experiences that really fuel demand generation programs. And I feel like we're struggling with that now too, with in-person events and any kind of face-to-face engagement off the table. So can you talk a little bit about, what's working in today's, demand generation, B2B marketing, when it comes to like really personalizing that content journey and delivering these memorable content experiences in this kind of really weird world we're living in right now?
Listen, I mean, it's a weird world, but it's just a new world. And I think it's scary for marketers. It was scary for me. It was scary for my team. Don't get me wrong. We had a lot of budget caught up in events. We have a huge travel budget that's also about just going and seeing our customers in a face-to-face manner. We had big plans from a direct mail perspective, sending to people's offices. I mean, that's hard. Yeah, it's doable. Companies like Sendoza and PFL, they've figured out workarounds, but it's not the same ability to execute. And I think for a lot of us overnight, we said like, I had this amazing 2020 plan, but we have to realize like that was our plan. It doesn't mean that we can try and make it work. We have to really rethink and reapproach. And, the interesting thing though, with all of those, and let's even just take events for a second, think about all the events that we've met at ourselves, Klaudia, is, what's unique about those events is the experience that's created. Right? Like, often there's a track at your own event. There's these different tracks.
Yeah.
And the beauty of those tracks is when we think about what we're doing in an event, why we love events, is you get there and you say, okay, I'm going to stick to this track because they've curated amazing speakers that are right up my alley. So if I'm a B2B marketer or I'm focused on demand or ABM, you may have a track specifically for me and my interests. Same thing if people are listening to this and they come from other sectors and they go to industry events. There's always that track that's right for you, right? And the interesting thing about that is we've lost that ability to do that in person, but I think that's the mindset we have to take to our digital experiences. is rather than sending someone and saying, here's this massive collection of content, go figure out what works for you. We have to create tracks that are no different than the tracks that we create at an event. They're no different than the way we curate a sales deck for an online call, or perhaps the curated items we would send someone in a direct mail type of play. Now we just have to take that to a digital side. And I think when you reflect on what we really loved about these face-to-face and try and bring them in, it's not that it's easy, but you start to have more of a template to work with.
Right. And obviously, when it comes to bingeable experiences, I mean, we're all so used to getting that, like from the B2C type companies, like your Netflix and your Spotify. We're so used to that in our everyday lives that we now, obviously buyers, because they're consumers, they also expect it in their professional lives. What are some examples of B2B brands actually, really taking this time to do it well and create these experiences with events off the table and really make them personalized and feel like they're kind of getting that Netflix or, Spotify experience?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we have to make sure we understand what we mean by that Netflix, Spotify experience, right? I think for a lot of marketers, we define personalization, in too much of a simple way.
The high name.
Yeah, high name. Exactly. High name is a great one, right? I mean, high name was very effective in 2010.
Yeah.
Right? And this is 2020, and we've gone well beyond name. I mean, think about even Netflix. Remember back in the day, the really cool thing about Netflix was it knew my name. Like I logged in and it was like, I'm choosing my user, my avatar. That was a really cool element. Today, though, what gets me, say on a Netflix email, is not that they send that email, and we all get their weekly emails, or I don't know what their cadence is, but and when we get that, it's not that they say, hey, Randy, we've got shows for you tonight. It's that I know that the actual shows that they're going to suggest are contextual to me, the actual content that they're going to suggest. And that's where we're going beyond first name, going beyond the logo. And I think that's where we have to take our entire marketing mindset. A lot of us, when we think about personalization, it's, well, how can I personalize that ad? I'm going to throw their name in there, their company name in there, maybe even imagery in the background that aligns to the industry that they're in. And don't get me wrong, that's really effective when you can use a platform like a 6 Sense or Demandbase or a Terminus that help you do those things. But what we have to remember is our goal is ultimately to get someone to click that, right? Hopefully we get that with the first name and the context. And when we deliver them somewhere, we got to do the same thing that Netflix does. We got to show that we've chosen the 10 pieces of content, right? I mean, I don't know how much content Netflix has, but it's a lot more than 10. But when we log in, we see something like 10, right? We're not overwhelmed. We have somewhere to start. And once we select that, then they can start to learn about our interests and they can iterate that with that on the fly. So, I think that's the first thing to understand here is, what do we mean by personalizing? And it's going away, as you nailed it, from I know your name. The question the other question you had is who are some of the companies that are doing a really good job with this? And listen, I think there were companies that were doing this really well even before COVID hit. But I think what COVID has done for many of us is it's put a big shift towards accounts in a number of ways. Number one, acquisition. We know the industries that are still buying and we're able to target them more and understand who we may be able to land with. But the other side of that is also from a customer retention perspective. I mean, that's every marketer I'm talking about, that's one of their big priorities for H2 of 2020 is it's all about retention. And if it's about retention, again, we need to understand our customers so that we can do meaningful things to connect with them.
Awesome. I love that. And I mean, obviously data plays a huge role here. And the fact that everything is so digital, it kind of gives us more data to really leverage and deliver those personalized experiences. Any tips that you'd provide, marketers looking to really create, manage, and optimize personalized content experiences at scale? What's Uberflip? Like even what's Uberflip doing on that kind of side of the spectrum?
Sure. So first off, I think we all need a few things to tackle anything new on, and that's always a focus on people, process, and technology. That's not a framework that I coined in any way. We all know that triangle. So the first thing is making sure that you've got your people focused on the right areas. As an example, we talked about events. I can't tell you how many CMOs I've spoken to who are trying to figure out, how do I refocus my event marketers, right? And I've spoken to other CMOs who have said that this is going to take us back to this world of the generalist, the generalist marketer who's got to do whatever happens to be in front of them. So, a lot of those people have to think about digital channels first now. The second is process. So the process in terms of getting that personalized experience out doesn't start with building the experience. It starts with understanding what content you have. So the framework that I've developed a number of years back was a big part of the book that I wrote that became an Amazon bestseller. It was very exciting as this content experience framework. And it's 5 steps. I'll just rhyme them off, and people can look it up to see more detail. But the first step is the idea of centralizing all that content. And then taking the time is step 2 is organizing. So really tagging the content so that you know what you have. Once you do those first 2 steps, then you can get to the middle and the fun stuff, right? The fun stuff is when we get to personalize and think about what we're going to use, but it's hard for us. Like, imagine being a marketer and trying to remember what content you created 6 months ago. Like, it's hard to remember that, right? Yeah. Like, I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, let alone what content. Or what did you watch on Netflix 6 months ago, using that analogy yet again. So when we've audited our content, tagged our content, we can surface the right assets really easy, especially for people who are newer to our teams and don't even know what content was created 6 months ago. So once you get to that stage, then you start building these experiences and distributing them. So that's step 4 is ingraining them into that into the campaigns that you're running. And a really simple way to think about the technology piece where we fall, which is that third pillar there, is what I'm talking about here is really the destination. And the destination is something that exists in every marketing campaign that we run, right? If you're an email marketing guru, then every email you send today has a CTA where you want them to click, and you want to take them out of the email onto your site so that you can track them better. Yep. Right? If you're on the team that's running all the digital ads, your goal is to get them onto your site and track the engagement and keep them coming there. Same thing would even be the email signature softwares that we see today that drive you to a destination. Sales reps are sending emails, and the collateral in there is to get you on the site so they can track that behavior. Every one of our channels, if you will, has a destination. And it's important that marketers have the ability to customize these destinations at scale. And the use cases are so different as well, right? Like, you may be using a destination for more of an ABM play versus an inbound play. Each of them is going to have a different degree of personalization expected by the buyer.
Awesome. Come to the portion of the interview where I want to see some examples. What kind of content formats are working right now? Are there any cool experiences that you could share? Do you have anything fun to show me?
Sure. Let me pull something up here. We'll try and do this effectively on the fly, right? So first off, when we think of examples, I'm going to focus on COVID time examples, companies that have really adapted well. And I'll show you just a few here really quickly. Let me share hopefully the right screen so you don't have to do editing to this later, right? So, a lot of what I've done over the last little while is I've talked to a whole bunch of marketers, right? You'll see on the screen some of the companies and some of the marketers that I've gone to speak to who are really doing cool things in these times. And, above there, you see some of the themes that I've heard from all of them. And I think the big part that you said is what are people doing to adapt right now? What's working now that didn't work before that's helping us get through this? And each of these companies are coming from different industries, different challenges that COVID has kind of thrown at them. And when we think of this idea of adapting to the customer, it's really realizing that what the customer wants from you right now may be very different than what they wanted from you 6 months ago. And there's some examples here. I'll tell you one or two stories here just to give you some perspective. So we work with a company called 3M. I think a lot of people know 3M, the masks they make, the Scotch tape they make, all those products. But we work with their PPE group. And what they realized more than ever in that rise of demand, they didn't have a demand issue, right? Like some of us as marketers, we may be dealing with demand issues. They had more than enough demand for their product. But it went to, they have to be there to help their customer. So a lot of their CTAs went from buy from us to get educated. And the same thing as you can see below there with Medtronic. Medtronic's another really interesting story. Medtronic's in the healthcare space. The group that we work with actually makes ventilators. So you can imagine in March, again, no demand issues.
Yeah,
right?
no
demand issues at all. But instantly they went, and this is very interesting, they had a sales team, or essentially a field marketing team, if you will, that would go into hospitals and would work with the clinicians to make sure they understood the products that had been purchased, ventilators. But in the past, these ventilators weren't used as often as they were now going to be used, and clinicians just weren't up to speed. And overnight, these field sales reps went from being told, come into the hospital, to, no, you can't come into the hospital, right? Like we know if we had loved ones, we weren't allowed. So naturally, they're not going to let a field sales rep essentially come into the hospital. So they had to go and they had to adjust to say, okay, well, instead of using all of our content to try and sell, let's use our content to try and educate, right? So I think a big focus you can see here is that shift to education. Another format that we all know is big is just the whole virtual event, right? And that last example I'll show you on this one is this company called SAI Global. Now, the cool part with them, from a timeline perspective, is everyone in their industry was going to an event in person, right? Like just like you said, when I think that was end of February your event, right?
Yeah.
So
the 24th, 26th.
Yeah, I had like 4 other events I was supposed to speak at in March alone, right? Yeah. I was supposed to be traveling the whole time. And they realized that. And what they did is they hijacked all the attendees in a timely manner. And what they said was, okay, we know you're supposed to go to this event mid-March. It's not going to happen. We're going to throw an event for you. It's going to be online. And they didn't have time to run digital event software or even find a vendor at the time. They actually used our platform to serve the content and divide it up into more chunkable, absorbable approach. And I think that's one of the things I've personally found with virtual events right now is, because people are trying to turn them from half-day events into multi-day events, which is tricky. If we actually just give the content and let someone consume it when they're ready, it's a complete different perspective.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And also I noticed on the last slide that you presented, you wrote there was fewer gates. And I love that kind of debate, whether we should be gating content or not. And I feel like in these times, I mean, let me know if you agree, but in these times, it is better to just kind of offer it up for free or just no gate, don't ask for any information right at once. Do you agree? Or do you think there's a time and place for gating and no gating?
So I definitely think there's a time and place for gates, but definitely in what we went through, right away, the idea of sending someone to go give us information to get information was not the way to approach your customers, your prospects. It was very much open up and be helpful. And when we ran a number of these webinars that came out of these conversations I had, it was ungated. It was we're going to tell you stories of other marketers coping during these times. The other thing talking about free that's interesting, and I'll just jump around here to another slide. So it is not just thinking about giving your content for free, but do you have products that you should give for free? And I know a lot of us may say, well, that's not marketing. That's like a business decision. Marketing's got to be at that table. Marketing's got to be pushing for thinking about how we adjust how we package our product. A couple of examples here. Wiley is another company that we get to work with over at Uberflip. And, we think of Wiley maybe as a publisher first, creating books, but they also have an e-learning department. And imagine overnight with all this hitting and all these schools that for a long time they were trying to push over the edge. And now instantly went to saying, okay, we're ready. but it's not about the sell in that moment. It's about providing, the product. So they provided free courseware. Similarly with Navis, who's in the hospitality industry, an industry really hard hit, unlike some of the examples that I just spoke to. What they did, which I thought was brilliant, is they had this add-on product that they often charge for. So they're a CRM for booking your next getaway in an Airbnb type of environment, or a resort or something of the sort. And what they said was, instead of taking this product they had, which was essentially shopping cart abandonment. So when you go to check out, and we're probably all doing this now, dreaming about our next trip. We get to that checkout and we're like, oh, I'll come back later. They can actually tell the property owner that this person was here and they abandoned. So imagine knowing all the people right now who are not comfortable to travel, and one day being able to go and hit them and say, we know you came to your site, it's safe now, come back. And instead of charging for that product, they gave it away. So these are ways that we can look at our product mix, which, I've been doing a lot of research, and there's some research that came out of Forrester that talked about, as well as PwC did a really interesting report for CFOs that talked about the things that we need to do. And a lot of it is looking as marketers at shifting the products we have, as well as the go-to-market strategy. Very
interesting. And I love that, especially, in times like these, people will remember because you helped them and you did something, without asking for anything in return. And when the time does, come for them to purchase something, that they'll remember you and they'll remember the experience you provided. And that's really all you want as a marketer, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just as the last point there, I think it's, for them to remember you've got to be relevant. Right? Yeah. And that's the last part. I mean, that brings back to what we were talking about out of the gate here, Klaudia, is like, the personalization element is so important, right? If we just try and throw our regular talk track at them, it's not going to work. And, this is an example here you can see of a company called Providence Health Services. Think of it kind of as like that walk-in clinic experience. And they had to shift so quickly back and forth. And they had to do so, though, in a very regional manner. Because as we know, the guidelines in different states and even areas within the states were so different. So, usually they want you to come to their walk-in clinic experience, but instantly they had to tell people, no, stay home. But then at different parts of the country, they had to tell people to take a different approach. So the ability to be relevant and talk to people in a meaningful way, I think they're a great example of adjusting. So you can see the content that was being served in Montana versus Washington was very different at the same time, depending on what the guidelines were for those buyers.
I love that. And I've noticed even on websites that I frequent sometimes, like if I show up to do some research for an article or anything like that, and then I go back to it and it's like, oh, welcome back, Klaudia. And I was like, whoa, how do you know that? So that's always just a nice kind of, aha moment for the person. And that will trigger that memory really well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to also kind of, hopefully get some inside scoop about Connex. It's one of my favorite conferences to attend. I always say it. And it's so funny because I have the Time Hop app that showcases your photos from a year ago or 2 years ago. It's been showing a bunch of memories from all my time in Toronto, because I know this is around the time where where you guys host the conference. So what do you think the future of your event and even events in general will look like post-COVID? Do you guys have any plans on taking that virtual experience route, or, doing those virtual events?
So it's funny, just a quick side story, which is every week at Uberflip, we celebrate anniversaries of people who have started with us. And there's almost, with about 150 people on our team, there's almost every week we've got an anniversary. And this past week we had no anniversaries, and we're all thinking like, why do we have no anniversaries? And we realized this is Connex week. Like, we would be crazy to start someone this week, but this year, no Connex. Now, and the other interesting thing is, we actually made a conscious decision last year that we were not going to run the event in August again. We were going to move it to the spring. So
I did hear that, and I was very, very upset. I found out on the last day of our event. I don't remember who I was talking to from your team, and they're like, yeah, no, we're not going to have it in August. I was like, what?
I know.
I always look forward to going to Toronto.
Now we're visionaries, right? Because there was this time between February and call it April or May that, people kept saying, okay, well, we're still going to run our event. And all we could think is we would have been in this push to sell tickets, to get people to come, to tie up speaker commitments. And thankfully, we had an intention to do this in the spring. Now, my guess is even in the spring, we're not going to be back to a regular event circuit. As much as some people are ready for it, the masses are not. And an event like Connix pulled people from not just all over North America, but globally. And so we have made the decision to invest in a virtual event experience. It's happening starting this fall. We've got a few different days and details are coming on that. For us, and you've been to the event, it's not, we don't run it like every other event. It's a very different vibe. It's a very different type of content in terms of how we pull it together. So we're making sure that we're doing this in a way that will live up to that expectation where this has to be an experience. I mean, after all, it's called the content experience.
Yeah. I love it. I can't wait. Looking forward. So I'm definitely going to keep my eye out on any updates for the fall.
Yeah, people can go to connix.uberflip.com to learn all about that event, what it's been and what's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going back to the content talk, I just wanted to, you're probably one of my favorite people to follow on social media because obviously you're posting such great content and the videos are awesome. So I wanted to talk about videos for a little bit. Why are you such a fan of video content as a marketer, as a marketing leader? And what have you learned from creating videos over the years or just overall your social media strategy in general?
Yeah, listen, I love video, but I think video's got to be used in the right place at the right time. Now, when it comes to social, I think video, because it's this moving element and it's really about grabbing people's attention when they're in that infinite scroll that we find ourselves on Instagram all the way through to LinkedIn and other channels. It's a great way to show people something that stands out. For me, it's also ability to be a storyteller. So I did a video that actually, it did okay in terms of engagement, but I've spent the entire summer up at a cottage. That's part of the realities right now. We can work wherever we want to, and I'm fortunate to have this place. But I was sitting there and I was talking all about this reality of speed to launch, which I think is another trend that we're seeing from marketers now more than ever, is the importance to get our revised plans, our revised go-to-market amid COVID up and running. And I was sitting there and I was thinking about the speed at which I run out on the lake to go grab my kids from a program that they're on. And I ended up telling this story of shooting me getting onto my jet ski as annoying as I'm sure as that was to some people to watch who are stuck inside of their apartments. I apologize. But the ability to tell a story, I think that's what you need in video. It's not just having a video. It's not, if every time I got there with the same background and just talked, then people don't know if it's a new video, if it's a new piece of content. So I think you've got to be a great storyteller. I think there's a lot of people that do that well on social. One of them that I love watching too, you probably know, is Yarby, Jason Yarbrough.
Yeah.
He's great at telling stories. So I think it's using video, but being creative with how you pull that together.
Awesome. And you mentioned Instagram, right? And I'm still kind of iffy about Instagram for B2B companies, but Uberflip does a really great job with your Instagram page. Do you have any tips for B2B marketers? I mean, some people may not be in these fancy, glamorous, visual type of, industries. So how do you think, Instagram kind of plays this role in B2B now, especially with new generations coming in and, they're all on Instagram and Snapchat and all these types of mediums. So do you see that? Do you see a future of B2B, marketing and social media on Instagram?
Absolutely. I think there's the right social channels for the right businesses. Let's start there, right? Mm-hmm. So there's certain channels that are going to be more effective depending on the business you're in and where your buyer's at and where they're willing to be engaged. So, when we think about Instagram as an example, I think there's also two elements to Instagram. There's your brand on Instagram. Then you've got, tied to that, you've got the profiles of people from your company that may be on Instagram. And then you've got the ads that you may run on Instagram. And each of them can and kind of do require a bit of a different approach. The ads that you run on Instagram, can be a little bit more about your product and your company and what you're trying to achieve. But I believe that the actual posts that you're doing there have to be more about how you are part of a community in one way or another. And it's a fine line that you have to walk. And we've all been challenged through the last number of months, even with some of the, very, important social issues that are happening, and how do we interact in those moments? And, we're not necessarily overly activists, if you will, but we're not going to shy away from the issues that are happening around us. So, in a time when Black Lives Matter has reached a point where it's really getting the right attention it needs, you have to decide then how you're going to act on that, and also not to use it as a platform for other business-focused initiatives in those moments. So it's an understanding of knowing how to use those channels. And I think it's something that requires more strategy than we give credit to. I mean, too often, I may not make friends with this comment, but too often we have some of the most junior people in our organization running our social strategy. And it's not to say they're not capable, but it's really giving guidance from some of the more senior marketing experience we have to those, up and coming marketers to make sure that they've got the support they need.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about you, Randy. Tell me, or tell the audience about your role as CMO of Uberflip. How long have you been in the role? What are some of your top priorities and key learnings so far?
Sure. So I'm a person who's very happy in their role. I do a weekly podcast, and I just interviewed someone fantastic earlier today for an episode that'll go live in the coming weeks. And her name is Melanie Marcus. She talked about loving what you do. And it made me realize that I'm quite fortunate to actually love what I do. I started this company, Uberflip, because I was a marketer, because I had the struggles of, that are same as of many of my peers, which is we have these creative ideas. We know the audiences we want to engage, but then we just get bogged down in logistics of trying to execute on that because, either we need, really advanced IT infrastructure or people to help execute. So, my day is really spent trying to sympathize with marketers and show that there are hacky ways or technology today to get you where you want to go. And I think that's the goal of a lot of marketers. It's really to do great things, and the key is making sure that technology and process isn't standing in our way.
Awesome. And of course, the series is titled CXO Conversations. And I know you talk to a lot of marketing leaders, whether it's on your podcast or just in general. So, I always like to ask, what kind of conversations are you having with other marketing leaders? What are some top questions and concerns that are going through everybody's minds, and how are priorities and stress levels kind of changing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So absolutely. I do this podcast that I just alluded to called The Marketer's Journey. And it's, we're just wrapping up the second season of it right now. Every week I get to talk to a CMO, and every one of these CMOs have a different story. And that's what I think make every one of us so interesting, and why it's so important to network. Unfortunately, we don't have events for that these days. But, the reality is, first of all, one thing I've realized is every CMO got to where they are in a especially unique way. That's a big part of what the podcast is about. And as well, every business requires a bit of a different angle. And that's where you got to find the right CMO with the right history to lead you in that moment. Sometimes you need that CMO who's had a path, through a sales role for many years, and as a result can really build that alliance there. Sometimes you need a really strong brand play. So, and depending on that CMO, you're going to have a different strategy that's going to help guide you through what's going on right now. I think the biggest trend that I'm seeing is people admitting that this is an unprecedented time, and this is the hardest time they've had to navigate, right? As a
Yeah.
leader. There's no training that will have gotten you through this. There's no, I lived through this experience. This is very different than, the financial crises that we've seen in the past. So it's approaching this with humility, and I think approaching it with, let's be prepared to change. And I think as long as you've got that mindset, as long as you're open to change, it's been pretty impressive what people have gone through. There was one marketer who I mentioned, this isn't even a CMO, but at a company called Navis, and they were the example that I gave you that's in the hospitality industry. And she said to me, and when we were chatting, she said, what this has really pushed us to do is do the marketing that matters, right? Like, in their case, they had lost some of their headcount. I think a lot of us have seen that happen in our teams, and it's forced us to actually look at what matters. And one of the ways that I've interpreted that with my team is now more than ever, we need to focus on speed. But the biggest obstacle, I would say, to speed on most teams is scope, right? Like, we all talk about speed, we all talk about priorities, and we have too many priorities. And I think too often it's because we scope our projects too big. We have to reduce the scope of these projects and really take on things that are going to move the needle and that our customers need right now. And a combination of what I heard from the marketer at Navis, this mindset of speed, it can only be accomplished if we scope down to more bite-sized projects that our team can crush through.
I love that. And I feel like, honestly, let's just leave it at that. That's a really good mic drop type of quote. That's all the questions I have for you. Any final words or thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, I mean, I think just I hope people will use this as an opportunity to do something great. And COVID is definitely, if you were to do a SWOT analysis, you could throw COVID on the opportunity side and the threat side. It's how do you view it, right? And with my team, we're trying to view it as an opportunity, not one that we want to capitalize in a terrible way, but one that we have to, focus on the opportunities it presents for our business. That's
great. Well, thank you so much, Randy. This was an awesome conversation. It's always great to see you, and I'm so glad to see you're doing well. Thank you, everybody who is checking out the video and has been watching so far. Hopefully, you could stick around and catch the next one. So thanks, everyone. Stay safe.